Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really critical and honestly a pretty painful moment in American history. We're going to look at how the powerful alliance between abolitionists and women's rights advocates completely shattered right after the Civil War.
And this quote from Elizabeth Cady Stanton, it just perfectly captures the incredible hope of that moment. The Civil War was finally over. Slavery was abolished. And for this brief, shining period, it really felt like a total reset was possible. A chance to rebuild the entire nation on the idea of true equality for everyone.
So how did it all fall apart? Well, we're going to walk through it. We'll start with that hopeful beginning, then look at the huge conflict that popped up over priorities. After that, we'll get into the great schism that tore the movement in two, the new strategies that came out of the ashes, and finally, we'll see how Reconstruction was a totally different experience for women in the South.
Okay, let's jump in. Picture this. It's right after the Civil War. The air is electric with possibility. This was the moment for a truly radical vision for what America could be.
So, the war is done, the 13th Amendment is passed, abolishing slavery, and this was a massive victory that women's groups, like the Women's Loyal National League, had worked tirelessly for. That success, it showed them they had real political power. So as the country started to figure out what freedom really meant for millions of formerly enslaved people, these women saw their chance to kick the door wide open and redefine American citizenship for everybody.
And all that energy, it led directly to this moment in 1866. You have these two powerhouse movements, women's rights and anti-slavery, officially joining forces. They create the American Equal Rights Association, the ARA, and this was it. This was the high point, the peak of a partnership that had been building for decades, all united under one banner with one incredible goal, voting rights for all.
But almost as soon as this grand alliance was formed, a really tough and deeply divisive question came up, and it pitted this beautiful ideal of universal rights against the cold, hard facts of political reality.
So the AREA basically split right down the middle, over strategy. On one side, you had leaders like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they were saying, this is it. This is our one shot to rebuild the entire country on equal rights for all, and we have to do it all at once. But on the other side, you had Frederick Douglass and many others saying, look, the political support for giving black men the vote is hanging by a thread. That has to be the top priority right now, or we could lose it all.
And this quote from Frederick Douglass just hammers home the stakes. For him, this wasn't an abstract debate. For newly freed black men in the South who were facing unbelievable violence, the vote wasn't just a right, it was survival. It was, as he said, literally a question of life and death.
And then you have black women like Frances Harper, adding another really critical layer to this. She directly challenged the white suffragists, basically telling them to recognize their own privilege. Her point, as you can see in this quote, was that just saying universal suffrage wasn't enough, because it ignored the unique ways that black women were oppressed by racism, sexism, and poverty all at the same time.
Well, these tensions didn't just stay a friendly debate. Things escalated, and fast. They turned into an open, bitter, and in the end, a permanent breakup.
The breaking point really came into focus during a campaign out in Kansas in 1867. Stanton and Anthony felt like their abolitionist allies had abandoned them, so they made a really shocking move. They formed an alliance with white supremacists who, for their own racist reasons, also happened to support women's suffrage. This decision, it horrified their old friends and showed just how deep the division had become.
Now this timeline right here, it really shows you the final blows that killed the alliance. First, in 1868, the 14th Amendment gets ratified, and for the very first time, the word male is written into the Constitution. A huge blow. Then, 2 years later, the 15th Amendment comes along and says you can't deny the vote based on race, but it says nothing about sex.
For Stanton and Anthony, that was it. That was the ultimate betrayal. They saw these amendments not as a step forward, but as the government actively writing women out of the promise of citizenship. They were so appalled that they led the charge to officially dissolve the AARA. The grand experiment was over.
So the big alliance is dead, but the fight for the vote? Oh, it's far from over. Out of the ashes of the AERA, two totally separate, competing women's suffrage groups pop up, and they have very different game plans.
So you've got two camps now. On one side is Stanton and Anthony's group, the National Women's Suffrage Association, or NWSA. They were furious about the 15th Amendment and wanted to fight for a brand new federal amendment for women. On the other side was the American Women's Suffrage Association, the AWSA.
They actually supported the 15th Amendment as a necessary step and decided to focus on a slower, state-by-state fight.
The NWSA, though, they came out swinging with this really bold and kind of clever legal strategy they called the New Departure. Their argument was basically this. Hey, by making citizenship a national thing, the 14th and 15th Amendments already gave us the right to vote, even if they didn't mean to. So their new plan was simple. Just show up and vote.
And that's exactly what women did. About 700 of them tried to register and vote. Susan B. Anthony, most famously, actually did it, and she got arrested for it. But the whole strategy hit a brick wall in 1875 when the Supreme Court shut them down. And this is a really important and frankly ugly turn in the story. After this legal defeat, the rhetoric of some suffragists changed. They started leaning into racist arguments, claiming that educated white women needed the vote to balance out the votes of black men.
Okay, so while all this legal drama is playing out on the national stage, you've got a totally different story of Reconstruction unfolding on the ground for women, both black and white, down in the devastated South.
For a lot of white Southern women, especially from the old elite, Reconstruction was all about trying to put the old world back together, to reclaim their status. But for newly freed black women, it was the exact opposite. It was this incredible chance to build a new life, to define womanhood for themselves, and to finally control their own work and protect their own families.
And a huge part of rebuilding that old world for white women was creating something called the Lost Cause narrative. You've probably heard of it. It was this intentional campaign to rewrite history, to pretend the war was about states' rights instead of slavery. And white Southern women were at the very heart of this effort, running groups like the Ladies Memorial Association.
This little story, it just perfectly captures the day-to-day friction. You have this former plantation mistress who gets mad when a black washerwoman she hired just did the laundry and left. See, the mistress thought her money bought the woman's entire day, just like under slavery. But the washerwoman knew better. She'd been paid for a task. That was freedom in action.
But, for all their conflicts and completely different goals, we have to remember that life was just incredibly hard for all women in the South. They were all dealing with economic ruin, the trauma of the war, trying to care for wounded soldiers coming home, and living in this constant, violent racial tension.
And that leaves us with this really tough question, one that social movements are still grappling with today. When you're fighting for justice and that ideal of equal rights for all smacks up against political reality, who gets to decide whose turn it is?